Today, we're going to break two traditional video rules so that we can fake super slow motion with a lower frame rate. So traditionally, you would be able to slow down your clip about 2.5 times if you shoot in 60 frames per second and you have a final playback of 24 frames per second. That means that in your editing software, you'll be slowing down your clip to about 40%. But with today's trick, you'll be able to slow down a 60 frames per second clip up to 10 times. Well, kinda. We'll see. How is this possible, you may ask? Well, there are a few things you have to do, but first, let's break our two video rules. The first rule we're going to break is the 180-degree shutter rule. This rule tells you that in order to view natural motion blur, you'll have to double your shutter speed from the frame rate. So for example, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/48. And on a mirrorless camera, the closest you can get will be a 50, so 1/50. And if you're shooting at a higher frame rate, say for example 60 frames per second, you will double that to 120 or 125 on a mirrorless camera. And this brings us to what we have to do now. We'll be shooting at 60 frames per second for illustration purposes, but know that you are able to try this effect as well with higher frame rate footage if you wanted to slow that down even further. So to be able to attempt at achieving this super slow motion, we'll be shooting at a shutter speed that is a lot higher. So in this instance, about 1/1000 or 1/2000. Feel free to try different ones to see which one works best for what you're doing. And throughout this video, I'll be showing you the difference of what it looks like with clips shot with the 180-degree shutter rule with a shutter of 1/1000 and 1/2000. So now we're going to be breaking our second video rule. Well, not really a video rule in the same way as the first one, but this is a little bit frowned upon. So once you bring a 60 frames per second clip into your editing software and we put it in a 24 frames per second timeline, you can slow it down up to 40%. If you do anything slower than that, you start to get very stuttery footage. And that's why it's frowned upon, because that's not smooth slow motion, but more like amateur slow motion, if you know what I mean. That is because there aren't enough frames in the clip for it to be slowed down further than 40%. To achieve a similar result of slowing 60 frames per second footage to 40%, you can also reinterpret that footage to 24 frames per second or 23.976 to be exact. So when you look at all of these clips at different shutter speeds slowed down to 40%, you can see that the ones at a higher shutter speed are a little bit more crisp and have more detail and less motion blur. So now we're coming to the next rule we'll be kind of breaking. Let's slow down all of these clips to 10%. That is effectively 10 times slower. As you can see, it actually looks pretty bad for all of these three clips. But that's because there's something we haven't done yet. And whenever you do any of these things, make sure that you always pre-render on your timeline if you're in Premiere Pro so that you're able to see exactly what's happening to your footage. So the next thing we're gonna do now is go to the same speed and duration window where you reduce your speed and select Optical Flow. Once you click OK, make sure that you pre-render this footage so that you're able to see what's exactly happening. This Optical Flow effect also is available in other editing software as well. I just can't remember what it's called, but if you know what it's called in DaVinci Resolve or in Final Cut Pro, let us know in the comments below. So Optical Flow is almost like magic. It creates new frames in your footage by analyzing the existing motion between each of the current frames. If there's motion blur, Optical Flow can misinterpret the edges, and that can lead to ghosting, blurring, and just some warping in the footage. So when we look at all of these clips, the one with the slower shutter speed has way more ghosting and more blurring than the other clips. This is why it's really important that you set that shutter speed a lot higher to eliminate that natural motion blur. Depending on what you're filming, this technique might not always work. You can always try to slow down your clip to 20% or about 5 times slower than original to see what that would look like. Depending on the clip, this might look better than slow down to 10%. Also, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're shooting at a really fast shutter speed, you're going to need a lot of light. Most likely you want to be shooting outdoors, or if you're doing it indoors, you need a ton of light. I find that this technique works best if you have people in the frame as opposed to small objects like balls or water. So this doesn't always work, but as always, this is another technique that it's good to learn about and that you can keep in your toolbox as a video maker and a filmmaker. Alternatively, you can also pay to get third-party software like Twixtor, which will be able to give you super slow-mo on your footage. So bear in mind that this might not always work, but it's always great to learn something new and know why things happen the way they do. So that's it for today's video. I hope you learned something new. And if you're still watching, here are a couple of videos you could watch next, and I'll see you there.